Hi everyone, welcome back to Misinformation in Science and Society. Here to listen, not to judge. I'm Annie, and today with us we have James Siderius, who is a PhD student at MIT studying misinformation and social media.
Oh,
Hi, how are
hey,
you?
good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Um,
So
okay.
you go to high school in Illinois,
I do. In the northern suburbs, yeah.
northern suburbs, near Chicago, or
Near Chicago. I live like an hour away from like downtown.
okay, okay, cool. I spent some time in Chicago. I like it there.
Uh-huh.
Uh, hmm,
Yeah. So, um, yeah, I basically started this project because I noticed a lot of like misinformation, especially like during COVID and like on social media. So, yeah, could you please like introduce yourself and like what do you do kind of?
of course. So my name is James Siderius. I'm a PhD student at MIT, specifically in the computer science department. Graduating at the end of the summer, I hope, with my dissertation, which is on misinformation, but more broadly, sort of on social media, how that's sort of revolutionized a lot of social networks, how people communicate, especially after COVID, where there was a lot of emphasis on online interactions over in person. I'll be doing a postdoc next year at MIT as well. Um, yeah, no, that's sort of my pitch. We'll see what happens from there.
Yeah. So why did you like choose this career initially? Or
Yeah, so I like working on interesting problems. I've sort of always been that way throughout, my childhood and high school.
Mhm.
I like thinking of problems that don't have obvious solutions, um, and where a potential solution might be, impactful for, the greater good or for society. And the biggest draw for me from academia is that you can basically research any problem that you want. Doesn't necessarily have to be directly related to some financial gain or immediate benefit. It can be just sort of anything that you think will be important or have impact. Um, and I mean, there's certainly other jobs that probably also provide this aspect, but it's nice to not be tethered to an objective that, depends on, say, like a company's success.
Mhm.
Um, and I also like the sort of aspect of teaching. I think that's cool. It sort of works a different part of your brain. And even when you think you've sort of mastered a subject, you'll be surprised that each time that you teach it, you actually learn it better. So I find that teaching is something that you can't really get in any other job, and so I sort of like that too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of relate to that, like teaching my like younger siblings math and stuff. Um,
Yeah, it's
yeah, for
nice.
sure.
Yeah.
hmm so why do you think truth is like so important and why do you think misinformation is such a big issue, especially like right now?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the reason truth is so important, right, is like if you think about decisions that people actually make, right? They make
hmm
decisions based on what they see on social media, maybe what they see in the news. And I think it's totally fine for people to make sort of independent decisions about what they want to do,
hmm
but those decisions should be based on truths and not falsehoods. And when you're sort of in this sort of internet culture, a lot of people are making decisions based on things they see that are maybe not actually factual. So as I said, like a lot of the social interactions that are occurring over social media instead of in person, especially, since sort of COVID has like pushed everything to be virtual. Um, and sort of before the internet, like news was always either printed or streamed on TV. And these types of news like were always like you could only basically release them if you had serious resources to basically get your own like television channel, or you had enough reputation that people like recognized you and they see your newspaper and they're like, oh, I know the New York Times.
uh-huh.
um, but now that there's like this sort of internet and social media culture, it's basically costless to produce content that you want. So like in a matter of minutes, I could say like set up a website that mimics the Huffington Post, and I could come into social media as a bot and basically like have a false headline and just like spread it and see like who it reaches.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like what's very dangerous is that social media sites are monetized mostly by advertising. I think Facebook's like 98% of their revenue comes from advertising. Um, and the way they maximize this is they want people to stay on the platform longer, right? They want people to see things that they're interested in, click on. They don't want them to leave and do something else.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but what that means is that they're actually encouraged to promote headlines that attract like the most viewership because they want people to stay. Um, and they don't really care about whether it's true or not, right? So the decision, they don't really internalize this idea of like people making, say, like who they vote for, like making this decision based on truthful information instead of falsehood. Um, and so the result of this is that like they often want to promote like interesting stuff.
Uh-huh.
Um, so like even if it's false, if it sells, but fantastic. So that encourages things like rumors and encourages people to create content that is interesting, even if it's not true. And so like a lot of these incentives push in the direction of like, spreading falsehoods a lot and people making decisions based on, you know, misinformation. And I mean, it can be harmless in some contexts. If it's like celebrity gossip or something, like not a big deal. Like if you want to believe that Jennifer Aniston is pregnant or something, like maybe this isn't like a big thing. But if you're making decisions based like, whether you get vaccinated, say, like based on things that are spreading that are misinformation, like this can be super dangerous, right? And it can affect sort of not just yourself, but could affect the population. It could affect, an entire community. So, that's why I think it's an important issue and why I think regulation is very crucial because there's this like clear misalignment of incentives to do sort of what is publicly good. And it's not something that I necessarily have the answer to, but I think that's why it's important to consider because I don't think free market sort of forces are driving this toward a good sort of equilibrium. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, would you say like the worst like type of misinformation is like the ones that are like that can affect your like decision making?
Yeah, I would say so, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
exactly in that example, like celebrity gossip might be totally fine, but
Mm-hmm.
if this is gonna like, if you're making up some kind of something that Joe Biden said that he didn't actually say, and this affects who you vote for in the 2020 election, then that's a lot less cool, right? I mean, like one affects just like how you feel about a certain person or something, and maybe it's interesting and maybe it's true or not, but it doesn't really have any broader impact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if it affects something that is going to really like change the course of like how society operates, like that's very problematic. Um,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
So I like saw on your website that you like were looking at interventionist policies.
Mhm.
Could you talk a little more about that? I think that was like really interesting.
Yeah, so these are sort of like possible like remedies to this problem that I mentioned, and there's like very different contexts where like different sort of remedies should apply. We have a couple models that we look at, doing, some of the policies discussed like in the public sphere or whether you should moderate content. So, removing misinformation,
Oh.
tagging misinformation from independent fact checkers. Um, this can work sometimes, but it also has this like backfire potential, which is that if you don't happen to catch all of it, then people are also much less scrutinizing of what's misinformation and what's not because
Mm,
they essentially assume that if it's not tagged, then it's also like good to go. So you have to be careful with this type of policy. The other one, which is like, Facebook has these very complex algorithms. I mean, using Facebook as an example, but it can apply broadly to these algorithms that sort of recommend content. Um, as I mentioned earlier, they have like incentives to basically recommend misinformation more because they think it'll spread more, keep people engaged. And their proposal is something like, look, like we have these very complex algorithms. We don't want to disclose these because they're sort of intellectual property issues. We don't want to like make this available. So instead, what we'll do is we promise to keep misinformation below some target, but let us sort of on our end like actually like manage it and figure out how to modify the algorithm in a way that will like hit that target.
mm,
Um, and that can work well, except that there's also issues in terms of like how the regulator enforces it, right? Because there's a lot of content that spreads and goes between people on Facebook, and it's very tough for a regulator to actually like verify that they're hitting their targets. So um, there's some uncertainty about how enforceable that policy would be. The other interventions that are like sort of less like Facebook related, but like on say Reddit, which is like more of a community-based social media platform where you have these different communities that are sort of share ideas. One of which was banned in 2020 called Or the Donald, which was a very extreme right group that was like rallying behind President Trump. Um, and some of the policies that we look at there are doing mild interventions instead of strong ones. So a strong intervention would be something like banning the entire community, which they did.
Mm,
But after that, what happened was a lot of the people from that community actually migrated to a more like conservative subreddit
mm,
community. So then there was a lot of misinformation spreading on that community. So it didn't really fix the problem.
mhm,
Uh, but like another intervention, which is like to quarantine them, which basically means that in order to participate in that community, you have to like make an account, you have to log in. The posts from that account or from that subreddit are not available on like broader subreddits, so you can't like on the main page you will never see anything from a quarantine subreddit.
mm,
Um, and that actually works pretty well because you basically only the extremists who are arguably going to spread misinformation regardless of whatever intervention you enact, like you basically just isolate them in some community where they can all just spread whatever misinformation they like, but at least it doesn't reach like the broader sort of mainstream community, or the broader sort of like Reddit user base. So sort of these like more subtle policy interventions that like can reduce misinformation might be better than like these very hardcore ones where you like completely censor or you um yeah take some like extreme action in terms of like preventing them at all from like uh sharing what they want to share. uh,
mhm.
yeah.
Oh, that's so interesting. I've like never really thought about those like policies and I've never heard of like the Reddit stuff. It's really interesting. Um, so I think that's all my questions about misinformation. Just for fun, do you have a role model?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is like sort of cliche, but I have professional and personal role models. Professionally, I think my two advisors at MIT are great role models.
Mm,
They're both very senior people, but they're also like they prioritize like their students developing. And I hope that I don't get like cynical as I get older. And if I'm an advisor to people, I hope that I sort of take the same approach, which is making it a priority to mentor and to advance sort of the capabilities and learning of my students,
mm,
which they've done tremendously, and I've learned a lot in the last 6 years. So I feel like I'm a much more capable researcher than I was when I entered 6 years ago. And then personally, I would again cliche, but I would say my parents have been great, very supportive, um, both personally and financially, and yeah, they've given me in general great advice throughout. Made me think about personal career decisions,
mm,
um, as well as other life decisions. And yeah, I think I've been very fortunate to be guided by very competent people. And I've heard horror stories, and they're more common than I hoped, about bad advisors or even worse, bad parents. But luckily, I've not had to encounter that. So um,
mhm. Yeah, that's so nice. So, um, yeah, that would be it. So just to close this out, do you have any like advice for people, especially like teens? It can be like about misinformation or like not, just like in general.
I won't make it about misinformation. But I don't know. I would say like in general, like figure out what like makes you tick and pursue that. I mean, there are definitely like I'm fortunate too in the fact that like I've always been interested in STEM more than I have like the arts or anything like that, and that's great because that's also like tends to be more financially viable. So I've been lucky in that respect, but I would still say, like, whatever you're excited about, whatever like gets you up in the morning, like try to find at least, even if you can't make a career out of it, try to find a good amount of time that you can dedicate to it, and like set personal goals for yourself to like, meet those. And I don't know, like, yeah, recently I've had like a lot of like pretty big setbacks that have been, made me really doubt myself. And then later on, and I did this in high school too, I had like several things where I doubted, whether I could go a certain direction, if I could cut it in STEM, or you know, take a certain, yeah, career path. But
Mm.
I sort of like shook those off and like sort of stopped doubting myself, and they sort of self-corrected and things kind of worked out. So I would say, like, in general, like, don't overread like the negatives, or any sort of bad news setbacks. Like,
Uh-huh.
it happened pretty much to everyone that I've talked to, that are like on, very solid career paths and doing great. So
Mhm.
that would be my recommendation, at least to like my high school self, would be like, just relax, you're doing fine. um
Yeah.
uh yeah.
I think that's pretty good advice. I feel like a lot of people would like relate to that. Okay, so I think that would be it. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Yeah, of course. Glad to help.
Great. Thank you. Have a great
Awesome.
like rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.